So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day I produced a blurry, had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithms really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could Xtra whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track Xtra.
Good evening, my name is John Downs, I'm the Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track Xtra. Now, recently I was approached by my old friend Dr. Darren Naish, who was working on a project which included various photographs purporting to be of cryptids, and he knows that I know probably more about the events of 1975 to 1978 in Falmouth Bay than most people left alive, and he asked me to tell what I knew about the Mary F's photographs, the so-called Mary F photographs, which have been a matter of controversy ever since they first appeared nearly 50 years ago. And it turns out that an awful lot of what is currently believed about them is wrong. I've extracted a small extract from my conversation with him because I think it will be of interest to people who watch this show. Well, it wasn't Shiels wasn't the person who did the Mary F hoax. I found out from Tony. Tony admits, of course, they're fake. They're made with plasticine and a sheet of glass. He told me he knew perfectly well they were fake. This is the interesting thing, that there was a pub in Falmouth, I can't remember the name, but I believe...
The Seven Stars?
No. It wasn't one of the ones I know about. Wasn't one of the ones I drank in. But there was a pub in Falmouth where Tony and a bunch of his mates had something called the Pipe Smokers Club. And they met once a week, but they just talk shit and do smoke pipes, and they were all artists. And round about early 1975, all of them started playing practical tricks on each other. I don't know the name of the pub, but they had it there. I think it might be in my Owlman book, but if not, it should be easy enough to find. And a whole bunch of local artists met up to get drunk and smoke pipes, and they all started, and Tony couldn't remember who it was who'd instigated this, they all started playing tricks on each other and giving each other practical joking pictures. And the one that Tony did, and I did see this, you know, the closing, this one was in early, I can't remember what year it was just after the Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie came out, because this went on for ages. And Tony faked up some UFOs behind a thing of telegraph wires and the telegraph wires were a stave of sheet music, and the UFOs were doing that da 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 da.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, he did that, and that was the one he did. And someone else, and I'm pretty sure I know who it was, faked the Mary F. The photographs became known as the Mary F. photos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they had been hanging around for a while, and if you look in Doc's book Cantrip Codex, and again, I've got a copy, but all my stuff's packed up in boxes at the moment. I have no idea where it is. If you look in there, you'll see some not very good faked photographs of a lake monster or a sea monster, whatever, by somebody called J.B. Gordon. Well,
Is there more than one photo? Do you remember?
I think there were two, but I can't really remember. I can't remember. I think there were two, and it was by some bloke called J.B. Gordon. Now, he was John Gordon. He was another painter, and he was an old friend of Doc's. I met him twice.
He was a painter, did you say?
Yeah, he was. He was an artist. He was a friend of Doc's. A guy called John Gordon. And from what Doc said, I am 80% certain that it was John Gordon who made the Mary F. photos, and they weren't made to hoax the general public. They were made as an ongoing round robin of gags that they were putting on each other. Now, Mary F. apparently was still alive when I last spoke to Doc about this, which was about 15 years ago. Whether she's still alive now, I have no idea. She got hold of these pictures, which was fine because they were doing the rounds around the whole of Falmouth's artistic surrealist twatting about community. She got hold of them and decided to pull a prank using them on the editor of the Falmouth Packet. It was meant to be a joke against the editor of the Falmouth Packet. They had Mary F. then got embarrassed when she got linked to these fucking things, and they got all over the world's press, and then went to ground and asked everybody not to identify her.
Okay.
But the two stories, one that she was Lady Falmouth and two that she was a nun, are both untrue. And that's all I know. I think the idea that it was Lady Falmouth or a nun, I think that came from readers of 14 Times, or I think it was called The News then. And that's as far as I know. That's everything I know. It's not much. But Chorvinsky was so determined to pin everything on Doc that he didn't see the wood for the trees, silly bastard. Anthony Ornempello was a journalist called Tony Pello, who used a false name because he was moonlighting from his job. Chorvinsky was a fucking idiot who had a complete E-Day fix that Doc was responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And Doc was part of the bunch of people who was responsible for everything. Doc certainly knew that the Mary F. photos were a hoax, but he wasn't the one who hoaxed them. And I think that's important, not because it's clearing Doc's name, because Doc wouldn't have cared if his name was cleared or not, but because it shows that there was a whole community of tricksters in Falmouth at that time, which I think adds to the sort of zeitgeist of weird shit that was going down. Which is why I put all those weird stories from the Falmouth Packet into Owlman, because I think it's not because I actually believe there was a tug of war between limpets and barnacles or whatever the story went, but it's because you had all these people playing stupid jokes on each other and on the media.
Yes.
Which, of course, culminated with the Halloween 1986 events in Morgawr Old Church, when Doc and the BBC guy went there, and Doc claimed he was going to call down Owlman, and in fact he just muttered a bit in Gaelic and fucked off to the pub. And that's pretty much all I know about the episode. However, I think it's important that we look at what actually happened in full, rather than doing what the late Mark Travinsky did and blaming it all on Doc Shiels and trying to claim that there was never any such thing as a Cornish sea serpent, and that the whole thing was a joke, or rather a cynical hoax on the behalf of a cynical Irishman out to make money. Well, Tony was all sorts of things, but I don't think anybody would ever have described him as cynical. He was a dear, sweet old man. He was like a second father to me, as I have said on several occasions recently, because the story has come up again. When I got divorced from my first wife, I fell out with my parents, and my father in particular refused to deal with me because he said that I had brought the family name into disrepute by getting divorced, which was probably untrue, but whether or not it was true is really a moot point. But I tell this story now just to say that when my father and I were estranged, immediately following Alison's and my separation, Tony Shiels was like a second father to me. He was a dear, sweet, kind, loving man, and I miss him terribly. He died, for those of you who don't know, about a year ago, 18 months ago in fact, and I miss him terribly every day. I loved him very much indeed. But that's not the reason I'm telling the stories. I'm telling these stories because I am serious about my career as a fortune zoologist. I was terribly disappointed when I first saw the Mary F. photographs, which were in Graham McEwan's book, Mystery Animals of Britain and Ireland, which I first read in 1987, I think. It's 1986 or 1987, doesn't really matter. And I'd heard about the Mary F. photographs. When I first saw them, I was so disappointed. I was thinking, well, how could anybody have taken these rather rubbish images seriously? And unfortunately, they are the best known images of what it purports to be Morgawr that have ever been taken. And them mixed with Tony's slightly disreputable reputation, and quite possibly my slightly disreputable reputation at one time, and the fact that the late Mark Travinsky, who was the editor of Strange magazine, which was a really, really, really good magazine, and he and I always got on fine until he read my book, in which I said very politely that Tony Shiels had pulled the wool over his eyes and completely bamboozled him, which is true. Mark Travinsky wanted to blame everything on Doc, including the fact that in his mind there hadn't ever been sea monster sightings off the coast of that part of southern Cornwall, which is actually palpably not true. So, I've now set the record straight. I hope you found it interesting. I'm going to be back on Saturday. What am I talking about on Saturday? Well, I believe, but I am filming these things in advance, so I may well have got this wrong, but I believe it's the second part of my conversation with my dear old friend Nigel Wright about the time that the Centre for Fortean Zoology went en masse up to a lake in Staffordshire where somebody, it was believed, had dumped a live crocodile. Interesting story, quite an amusing story, and you'll be able to see all about it on Saturday. You see,